Chef Antoine Dubois, a famous and arrogant culinary titan, publicly humiliated young Elijah Carter on his first day, seeing an easy target. He didn't know that quiet newcomer wasn't just a cook. He was a strategic force about to turn that humiliation into the downfall of an empire. "You're kidding me, right? This is what you call Holland sauce." Chef Antoine Dubois' voice echoed through the restaurant kitchen like thunder, causing all the employees to freeze instantly. Elijah Carter, only 23 years old, stood motionless at the center counter, watching the famous chef pour all of his sauce into the trash can with a theatrical and contemptuous gesture. The silence in the kitchen was deafening. 15 pairs of eyes fixed on the humiliation unfolding like a public spectacle. "I've made this sauce hundreds of times, chef," Elijah replied in a calm voice, but his hands were shaking slightly at his sides. It was his first day at the prestigious Bordeaux restaurant, considered one of the best in New York, and this wasn't exactly the impression he wanted to make. Chef Antoine Dubois, star of 3 cooking shows and owner of a restaurant chain worth millions, approached the young man with a cruel smile on his lips. His impeccable clothes and arrogant posture contrasted brutally with the simple worn uniform Elijah had bought at a thrift store, especially for this job. "Hundreds of times where?" "At community culinary school," Antoine sneered, eliciting muffled laughter from some of his colleagues. "Or maybe in your grandmother's kitchen making comfort food?" What Antoine didn't know was that Elijah had graduated at the top of his class from the renowned Lord and Blue Culinary Academy, paying for every penny with 3 jobs and a scholarship he earned after impressing the judges with dishes that combined classic French technique with flavors from his family heritage. "Look, kid," Antoine continued, wiping his hands on a cloth as if he had touched something dirty. "This isn't the place to experiment with recipes from your hometown. This is a serious restaurant with serious customers who pay serious money for real food." Elijah took a deep breath, and for a brief moment, something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Not anger, but a quiet determination that only exists in those who have overcome obstacles that others cannot even imagine. Growing up in the Bronx, losing his father at the age of 12, supporting his mother by working 3 different jobs while studying culinary arts, all of this had forged an inner strength that Antoine would never understand. "I understand perfectly, chef," Elijah said, lowering his head slightly. "Can I try again?" "You can, but this time follow the recipe I teach you exactly. No improvising, no exotic spices." "No." Antoine paused dramatically, looking Elijah up and down. "Unnecessary creativity." The other cooks laughed discreetly, but some of the older ones exchanged uncomfortable glances. They had known Antoine for years and knew that his cruelty toward new employees, especially those who didn't fit the restaurant's traditional profile, was a trait that tarnished his entire professional reputation. As Antoine walked away to inspect other stations, Elijah remained silent, rearranging his utensils with precise, calculated movements. His colleagues watched him with a mixture of pity and curiosity, unaware that they were witnessing the first moments of a transformation that would forever change the dynamics of that environment. What no one in the kitchen realized was that Elijah carried with him something much more powerful than refined culinary technique or secret recipes. He had a secret that would make Antoine swallow every word of contempt and deeply regret underestimating the young man he had just humiliated in front of everyone. In the weeks that followed, the Bordeaux kitchen became a silent battlefield where Elijah was Antoine's constant target. Every dish he prepared was dissected with methodical cruelty. Every mistake, real or imagined, became grounds for elaborate public humiliation. "Elijah, come here immediately," Antoine's voice cut through the noise of the kitchen during the dinner rush. Elijah dropped the knife he was using to chop onions and walked over to the main station where Antoine was holding a plate of grilled salmon. "Explain to the whole team what you call this," Antoine said, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "Because I call it badly seasoned garbage that no customer should be forced to pay for." The other cooks stopped what they were doing, some with uncomfortable expressions, others clearly enjoying the spectacle. Elijah examined the plate. The salmon was perfectly cooked, the temperature ideal, the seasoning balanced. There was nothing wrong with this dish. "Chef, may I ask specifically what the problem is?" Elijah asked respectfully. The problem? Antoine laughed loudly, throwing the entire plate into the trash with theatrical force. The problem is that you don't understand that in this restaurant we serve haute cuisine, not street food seasoned with whatever your cultural roots consider tasty. The words hit Elijah like invisible slaps. For 17 years, growing up in a tiny apartment in the Bronx with his mother, Eleanor, a nurse who worked double shifts to pay for his cooking classes, he had dreamed of this moment. Working in a renowned restaurant, applying everything he had learned in school, showing that talent has no color or zip code. But the reality was proving to be very different from the dream. Do it again. And this time, follow my recipe. Exactly. Exactly. No improvising. No exotic spices. Nothing that even remotely reminds me of where you came from, Antoine continued, moving dangerously close to Elijah's face. You're not in your community here. Here you represent my restaurant. Elijah nodded silently and returned to his station. As he seasoned a new piece of salmon, exactly as Antoine had instructed, without any personal touches, his mind drifted back to the countless nights he had spent studying classic French techniques. Cordon Bleu hadn't just been a school for him. It had been his salvation. At 15, when he landed a part-time job washing dishes at a small French bistro in Manhattan, the chef-owner, a kind Frenchman named Henri, had noticed how closely Elijah watched every movement in the kitchen. Henri began teaching him basic techniques after hours, impressed by the boy's ability to absorb knowledge like a sponge. You have something special, Elijah, Henri used to say. Skilled hands and, more importantly, an exceptional palate that can't be taught. You're born with it. It was Henri who encouraged him to enroll at Cordon Bleu, who helped him secure a partial scholarship, who coached him for interviews. During 3 intense years, Elijah had absorbed not only refined culinary techniques but also gastronomic history, wine pairing, kitchen management, and even fine dining etiquette. He had graduated at the top of his class. And now here he was, being treated like a complete amateur by a chef who didn't even bother to taste his food properly before rejecting it. Elijah! Antoine shouted again. That sauce is a disgrace. Where did you learn to cook? Watching TV shows. This time, some of the older cooks exchanged genuinely embarrassed glances. Mike, the sous chef who had been working at Bordeaux for 5 years, muttered under his breath, Man, that sauce is perfect, better than many I've made. But Antoine was far from finished. Over the next few days, he intensified his campaign of systematic humiliation. He assigned Elijah only the most basic and degrading tasks. Peeling potatoes for hours, cleaning pots, organizing the stock. When Elijah showed skill at something more complex, Antoine immediately transferred him to another menial job. You're new here, Antoine said one day, intercepting Elijah as he prepared a velouté sauce with impeccable technique. You have to earn the right to touch the important preparations. Get back to the potatoes. What Antoine didn't know was that Elijah had begun to pay attention to details that went far beyond the kitchen. During breaks, he observed Antoine's interactions with different employees. He noticed how the chef treated the white cooks with at least a basic respect, even when they made obvious mistakes. He noticed how Antoine spoke differently when he thought Elijah wasn't listening. More importantly, Elijah had begun to notice certain questionable practices that Antoine employed when supervisors weren't around. One afternoon, Elijah was organizing the freezer stock when he heard Antoine on the phone in his office, the door ajar. The conversation made him stop what he was doing. No, don't hire anymore. You know, of that type, Antoine said, clearly thinking he was alone. One is enough trouble. The Bordeaux clientele has specific expectations about the kind of presentation we offer. Elijah felt his blood run cold. Not just because of the words, but because of the casual tone, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. It was at that moment that something changed inside Elijah. The constant humiliation, the veiled comments, the degrading tasks. He could put up with all that in the name of his dream of working in haute cuisine. But to find out that Antoine was actively sabotaging opportunities for others like him, that crossed a line that could not be ignored. Elijah continued organizing the freezer as if nothing had happened. But his mind was now working on a completely different frequency. He began to remember every inappropriate comment, every instance of differential treatment, every situation in which Antoine had demonstrated a clear pattern of discriminatory behavior. More importantly, he began to think about how to document it all. That night, Elijah left the restaurant with the same calm demeanor as always, politely greeting his colleagues and thanking them for the day's work. But behind that facade of resignation, a strategy was forming. Antoine had completely underestimated who he was dealing with. What the arrogant chef couldn't see behind the simple uniforms and humble origins was that Elijah possessed something that all the privileges in the world couldn't buy. A lethal combination of refined intelligence, determination forged in adversity, and most dangerous of all, the patience of someone who had learned that true justice is worth waiting for. Each new humiliation only fueled a growing strength that Antoine could never understand. The silent strength of someone who was about to turn all that injustice into fuel for something that would change not only his own life, but the entire functioning of that toxic environment that hid behind expensive dishes and a fabricated reputation. 3 weeks after overhearing that phone conversation, Elijah had developed a routine that went unnoticed by everyone at Bordeaux. He arrived 15 minutes before his shift, not to impress Antoine, that was impossible, but to observe and document. His cell phone, discreetly positioned among the utensils, captured revealing conversations. His small notebook, disguised among recipes, recorded every discriminatory comment, every instance of differential treatment. Antoine, completely oblivious to what was happening, intensified his campaign of humiliation with a cruel creativity that impressed even his most insensitive colleagues. "Elijah, I need you to prepare a bechamel sauce for today's special," Antoine announced during the lunch rush, knowing full well that Elijah had mastered that technique. "But I want Mike here to supervise you. We can't risk you overseeing it." Mike, the sous chef, was clearly uncomfortable. "Chef, I'm sure Elijah can make a bechamel on his own. He has very good technique." "Mike," Antoine replied with a cold smile, "are you questioning my leadership? Because I can easily find another sous chef who understands the hierarchy here." Elijah prepared the sauce under unnecessary supervision. Every move commented on by Antoine as if he were a condescending teacher dealing with a child. "See, he almost burned the butter. Without supervision, we would have had to throw it all out." The sauce was perfect, as Mike discreetly confirmed with a nod of approval. But Antoine had planted the seed of doubt he wanted. Elijah was incompetent and needed to be babysat. That afternoon, after a particularly difficult day of humiliation, Elijah left the restaurant and walked to a small cafe 3 blocks from Bordeaux. There he met Mark Jenkins, an investigative journalist specializing in reports of workplace discrimination, whom he had met through an online group of Black professionals in the culinary arts. "How's our evidence gathering going?" Mark asked, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed the notes Elijah had compiled. "It gets easier every day," Elijah replied, showing him the most recent recordings. "He doesn't care what he says when he thinks he's among his own. Yesterday, he told the manager that he hired a 3rd white cook because we can't look like we're turning into a community center." Mark shook his head, clearly impressed by the systematic nature of the prejudice. "Elijah, you've got enough material here for an article that would change this guy's career forever. But I have to warn you, when we publish this, you're probably going to lose your job." "I know," Elijah replied calmly, "but it's not just about me. How many other people like me has Antoine humiliated? How many opportunities has he sabotaged?" What Mark didn't know was that Elijah had expanded his investigation far beyond direct discrimination. By browsing public records and talking discreetly with former employees, he discovered that Antoine had a pattern of behavior that stretched back years. Black and Latino employees rarely lasted more than a few months at Bordeaux, always fired for incompetence or not fitting in with the restaurant's culture. But Elijah had saved his most explosive discovery for last. During one of his cleaning sessions in Antoine's office, a task he voluntarily took on to gain access to privileged information, he found a folder containing resumes of rejected applicants. Their qualifications were impressive: graduates of renowned schools, experience in prestigious restaurants, impeccable references. They all had something in common: names that suggested a non-white ethnic origin. Even more shocking were the emails Antoine exchanged with other chefs in the city, creating an informal network of recommendations that effectively barred non-white professionals from New York's best restaurants. A cartel disguised as professional networking. "Are you sure you got copies of all this?" Mark asked, examining the evidence with disbelief. "All documented, dated, and backed up in 3 different places," Elijah confirmed. "But Mark, I want more than just an article. I want Antoine to fall in front of everyone he's ever humiliated." It was then that Elijah revealed the second part of his plan. Next week is the New York Gastronomic Association's annual dinner. Antoine will be there along with all the big names in the city's culinary scene. He's receiving an award for professional excellence. Can you imagine the irony? Mark smiled slowly, understanding the direction the conversation was taking. "You want me to publish the article the night before the dinner?" "Better," Elijah replied, his eyes shining with a determination Mark had never seen before. "I want you to publish it on the morning of the event. I want Antoine to find out that his career is over on the very day he's supposed to be celebrated." But there was still a third part to the plan that Elijah didn't reveal even to Mark. Through Henri, his former mentor at the French bistro, Elijah had obtained something that would completely change the game. The French chef, now retired but still respected in the gastronomic community, had been outraged to learn of the treatment Elijah was receiving at Bordeaux. "My young man," Henri had said with his French accent heavy with emotion, "you are one of the best students I have ever had. Don't let the ignorance of others define your worth." Henri had made a few calls to former colleagues, and the result was an opportunity Antoine could never have imagined. Elijah had been discreetly invited to a private audition with the Michelin Group's new restaurant development team. The audition would take place the same week that the scandal was about to explode. While Antoine continued his daily humiliations, completely oblivious to the hurricane approaching, Elijah worked silently on his final preparations. Every insult, every discriminatory comment, every attempt to break his spirit only fueled the iron determination of someone who knew that true justice sometimes needs to be carefully orchestrated. The night before the Gastronomic Association dinner, Elijah remained in the empty kitchen of Bordeaux, practicing dishes that Antoine would never let him prepare officially. His hands moved with the precision of a surgeon and the passion of an artist. The same combination that had impressed his teachers at Lord & Blue. There, under the fluorescent lights of the kitchen, where he had been systematically humiliated, Elijah was putting the finishing touches on a transformation that had begun long before Antoine realized he was dealing with someone dangerous. The morning of the Gastronomic Association's annual dinner began seemingly normal for Antoine. He woke up in his luxurious Manhattan apartment, put on his most expensive tuxedo, and practiced the acceptance speech he would give when receiving the Professional Excellence Award. At 9 o'clock in the morning, his phone began to ring incessantly. "Antoine, have you seen the article in the New York Culinary Tribune?" The association coordinator's voice was visibly shaking. "You need to come here now." 20 minutes later, Antoine was standing in front of a printed copy of the newspaper, his photo plastered on the front page next to the headline, "The Hidden Face of Haute Cuisine: How an Award-Winning Chef Built an Empire on Systematic Discrimination." Mark Jenkins' article was devastating. Audio recordings of Antoine mocking non-white employees. Emails exchanged with other chefs creating a network of racial exclusion. Statistics showing that in 5 years only 2 black employees had remained at Bordeaux for more than 6 months. "This is absurd slander," Antoine shouted, but his voice sounded weak even to him. "Who is this Elijah Carter? I've never heard of him." That's when the coordinator showed him the second page of the newspaper. A photo of Elijah in his uniform in the Bordeaux kitchen alongside a statement that made Antoine feel the ground disappear beneath his feet. Elijah Carter, 23 years old, graduated as the best student at Lord & Blue, chef at the Bordeaux restaurant for 2 months. "I systematically documented every discriminatory comment, every instance of differential treatment. Antoine Dubois created a toxic environment that not only harmed me, but prevented dozens of talented professionals from growing because of the color of their skin." Antoine reread the sentence 3 times. Elijah Carter, the shy boy he had publicly humiliated, who peeled potatoes in silence, who never responded to his cruel taunts. The newbie everyone had completely underestimated. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Antoine received a call from the restaurant chain's legal department. "Mr. Dubois, we need to meet immediately. 5 former employees have filed lawsuits for racial discrimination. The Bordeaux brand is being removed from all restaurant guides." At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, an official notification arrived. His participation in the dinner had been cancelled. The Professional Excellence Award would be given to another chef. At 6 o'clock in the afternoon, Antoine found out who his replacement would be. Elijah Carter, at 23, becomes the youngest executive chef in the history of the Michelin Group in the Americas, announced the official statement. After a private audition that impressed the entire international board, Carter will take over the operation of 3 new restaurants in New York with complete creative autonomy and a budget of $2 million. Antoine read the news 5 times, each word cutting deeper than the last. The boy he had forced to peel potatoes had achieved in one day what Antoine had taken 15 years to build. That night, while Antoine remained locked in his apartment, watching his career crumble in real time on social media, Elijah was in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, wearing an elegant tuxedo, receiving compliments from renowned chefs from around the world. "How did you manage to stay calm all this time?" asked Henri, his former mentor, hugging Elijah with paternal pride. "I've learned that the sweetest revenge isn't destroying those who hurt you," Elijah replied calmly, watching the camera flashes. "It's building something so extraordinary that they realize how small they always were." Mark Jenkins approached with a satisfied smile. "Elijah, the article already has 500,000 views. 12 New York restaurants have announced complete overhauls of their hiring policies. And Antoine Dubois, he lost everything," Mark replied. "The investors pulled their funding. The Bordeaux is closing next week and he's facing 6 lawsuits. Oh, and we found out he lied on his resume. He never went to the French culinary school he claimed to attend." Elijah just nodded silently. There was no sadistic satisfaction in his eyes, just the serenity of someone who understands that true justice is inevitable when built with patience and intelligence. Across town, Antoine Dubois, who had woken up just one morning earlier as an award-winning and respected chef, now faced the reality that his arrogance had not only destroyed the careers of others, but had dug his own professional grave. What Antoine discovered too late was that he had underestimated not just a cook, but a force of nature disguised as humility. And now, as Elijah built a culinary empire based on talent and inclusion, Antoine learned the most expensive lesson of his life. Those who build power on prejudice always end up buried by their own rotten foundations. But the story wouldn't end with Antoine losing everything. Elijah still had one last surprise that would completely redefine the meaning of turning injustice into purpose, proving that a few moments of humiliation don't destroy extraordinary people. They just reveal what they are truly capable of. 6 months after the scandal that rocked the New York culinary world, Elijah Carter walked through the 3 kitchens of the new Michelin Group restaurants he now ran. They weren't just establishments. They were laboratories of inclusion where young talents from all backgrounds found real opportunities for growth. "Chef Elijah, Gastronomy International magazine wants to do a cover story on our inclusive hiring philosophy," said Sophia, his new communications manager, a young Latina whom Elijah had promoted from sous chef in just 4 months. Elijah smiled, looking out the panoramic window of the office that had once seemed impossible to achieve. "Excellent, but make it clear that we are not a social experiment. We hire the best, regardless of where they come from." At that very moment, across town, Antoine Dubois was sitting in a tiny apartment in Queens, watching the food news on his cracked cell phone. The story was about Elijah receiving the Young Chef of the Year award for the 2nd time in a row. Elijah Carter has not only revolutionized New York's haute cuisine, but has set a new standard of inclusive leadership that is being replicated in restaurants around the world, announced the presenter. Antoine turned off his phone and looked around the small space where he now lived. After losing everything: restaurants, home, career, he had managed to find only a job as a contract cook on a food truck. Ironically, he was now literally on the same level where he had tried to keep Elijah imprisoned. 3 weeks earlier, Antoine had tried to approach Elijah at a food event. Elijah, I wanted to apologize. I know I was terrible to you. Elijah had stopped, looked Antoine in the eye with his usual serenity, and replied, Antoine, you don't need to apologize to me. You need to apologize to all the talented people you never hired because of your prejudice. The response cut deeper than any insult. Back in his office, Elijah received the call he had been waiting for months. Elijah, it's Henri. I have an interesting proposal for you. Henri, his former mentor, was now working as a consultant for a special project, creating a network of scholarships for young people from disadvantaged communities interested in gastronomy. We need someone who understands both the technique and the struggle. Someone who proves that excellence has no address. I accept, Elijah replied without hesitation. But on one condition. I also want to create a mentoring program so that no young person has to go through what I went through. At the end of that day, Elijah was in the kitchen of his main restaurant, not preparing a complex dish, but teaching the basics to 5 young apprentices. 2 from the Bronx, a Somali refugee, an ex-convict in rehabilitation, and a transgender girl who had been kicked out of her home. The first lesson in professional cooking isn't about technique, Elijah explained as he demonstrated how to hold a knife properly. It's about respect. Respect for the ingredients, for your colleagues, for your customers, and most importantly, for yourselves. Mike, the former sous chef at Bordeaux, who had witnessed the humiliations, now worked as executive chef at one of Elijah's restaurants. Do you know the difference between you and Antoine? He asked during a break. Antoine built an empire based on exclusion. You're building a legacy based on opportunity. 6 months after the night that changed everything, Elijah received an unexpected message. It was from a young black female cook in Chicago. Chef Elijah, your example gave me the courage to speak out about discrimination at the restaurant where I work. Today, I got my first job at an establishment that values me. Thank you for showing that we can turn things around. It was the 10th similar message that week. Antoine, that same day, was serving burgers at the food truck when he recognized a customer. Mark Jenkins, the journalist who had written the devastating article. Antoine Dubois? Mark asked, incredulous. You work here now? It's all I have left, Antoine replied, lowering his eyes in shame. I lost everything. My career, my money, my reputation. Even my family turned their backs on me. Mark paid for the burger and before leaving said, You lost everything because you built everything on something rotten. Elijah is proving that you can build something much greater when you base it on real merit, not prejudice. That night, Elijah was at home, a comfortable but unostentatious apartment, when he got a call from his mother. Son, I saw you on TV again. Your father would be proud. Mom, remember when I cried after that first day in Bordeaux? You said that sometimes people have to underestimate us to find out what we're capable of. And you proved you were right, she replied emotionally. Elijah hung up and looked out the window. Below, New York pulsed with the energy of millions of dreams being pursued. Some would be realized, others broken, but he had learned the most valuable lesson of all. The best revenge is not to destroy those who hurt you, but to build something so extraordinary that it renders irrelevant all the smallness they tried to impose on you. Antoine had tried to humiliate him publicly, reduce his value, keep his talent hidden. In response, Elijah didn't just rise up, he built an entire platform so that others like him could shine, too. The real revolution wasn't the fall of Antoine Dubois. It was the rise of a movement that proved that when you open doors to those with real talent, regardless of their background, you don't just change individual lives, you transform entire industries. And Elijah Carter, the young man who once peeled potatoes in silence while being humiliated for his background, now ran not just restaurants, but a new philosophy that redefined what excellence means in American cuisine.